mysterious giants of the Bible. One of the most well-known stories in the Bible is the battle between David and Goliath. In this narrative, young David, representing the Israelites, faces Goliath, the towering champion of the Philistines. Goliath is described as an enormous figure standing around 3 meters tall. His armor alone weighed nearly 60 kilograms, and the tip of his spear weighed 7 kilograms. Goliath belonged to a lineage of giants, and another intriguing but lesser-known figure connected to this lineage is King Og. According to the text, Og slept in a bed over 4 meters long and 2 meters wide. Both Goliath and Og are mentioned as remnants of the Rephaim, or as other translations suggest, they are among the last of the giants. This leads to the compelling question: who exactly were these giants, and what is their connection to the biblical narrative? Additionally, how are these figures linked to the events of the Great Flood, the fall of the angels, and early Christian ideas about the origin of demons and possessions? In this story, we'll dive deep into these mysteries. We'll not only explore the biblical accounts but also delve into parallel traditions found in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch, Mesopotamian myths such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, and even Greek traditions surrounding the Titans and the Trojan War. So, if this subject sparks your interest, get comfortable. This video is packed with complex ideas and rich historical references. The first mention of giants in the Bible comes in a rather enigmatic passage. It says, "When men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves." It continues, "In those days, and also afterward, the Nephilim were on the earth. These were the mighty men of old, the heroes of renown." This passage speaks of a group called the sons of God, who took wives from the daughters of men. From this union emerged a third group, the Nephilim, often translated as giants. The text is presented with little explanation, probably because the author assumed the original readers living in biblical times were already familiar with the context. Thus, the details are left sparse. Interestingly, this story of the Nephilim serves as a prelude to the Great Flood, explaining humanity's growing wickedness, which the flood aimed to resolve. However, the problem seems to persist even after the flood, as later accounts during the time of Moses mention the Nephilim once again. One curious passage notes that when Moses sent scouts to explore the land of Canaan, they reported seeing inhabitants of enormous size. They said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Yet despite these intimidating reports, biblical texts say that Moses' followers, under his leadership, defeated several of these so-called giants, including King Og of Bashan. The giants in the time of David. In addition to Goliath, other giants are mentioned in the Bible during the time of David, such as Sippai, Lami, and an unnamed warrior said to have 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand and foot. Among these giants, only Goliath's height is explicitly recorded as being 6 cubits and a span. A cubit is the distance from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, and a span is the width of an open hand. This measurement gives Goliath an estimated height of around 3 meters, although ancient manuscripts vary. The oldest manuscript, the Dead Sea Scrolls, states his height as 4 cubits and a span, which would place him at around 2 meters, less impressive but still formidable. The Dead Sea Scrolls also mention other giants, some of whom are truly massive, reaching heights of 3,000 cubits, or roughly 1,500 meters. These exaggerated figures suggest an ancient fascination with the idea of giants, which extended beyond the biblical tradition. To truly understand the origins of these giants, it is necessary to delve deeper into the story of the sons of God and their union with the daughters of men, which the Bible describes in very brief terms. Today, the phrase sons of God might sound generic, but in the context of the Genesis account, the Hebrew term B'nai Elohim referred to divine beings, members of a celestial court or divine council. These entities were seen as lesser gods or angels, who served under the supreme God. This idea of a heavenly council was common in the ancient Near East. For instance, in ancient Ugaritic texts, the head god El is portrayed as an elderly king surrounded by his divine offspring, the B'nai El, who acted as a council. Similarly, the Bible speaks of God, or Elohim, as being surrounded by celestial beings who later came to be identified as angels. When Genesis says that the sons of God took mortal women as wives, it is describing a union between celestial beings and human women. The offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, often referred to in Greek translations as giants. The account in Genesis is brief, but it raises numerous questions. What happened to these divine beings? How many were involved? What became of their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim? who were described as famous heroes of old. Unfortunately, the Bible itself does not provide answers, but other ancient texts, such as the Book of Enoch, expand on this story in fascinating ways. The Book of Enoch, written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, provides a detailed narrative of what occurred. According to this text, a group of celestial beings, known as the Watchers, were assigned to observe and oversee human affairs. But over time, some of these Watchers became attracted to human women and, knowing the consequences of their actions, made a pact to prevent any of them from betraying one another. Led by their chief Semjaza, 200 Watchers descended to earth and took human women as wives. The Book of Enoch also explains that these Watchers taught humans various forbidden arts, including medicine, magic, and metalworking. With these new skills, humans became more corrupt, leading to widespread violence and chaos. The children of these unions, who were giants by birth, further oppressed humanity, devouring human food and, when that was exhausted, turning to eating humans themselves. Eventually, they even began to devour one another in a monstrous display of excess and greed. In response to this rampant destruction, the cries of the surviving humans reached the heavens. God then sent 4 archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, to intervene. Michael and Raphael were tasked with imprisoning the Watchers beneath the earth, while Gabriel was sent to destroy their offspring, the giants. Uriel, on the other hand, was instructed to prepare Noah for the coming flood, which would cleanse the earth of the wickedness wrought by the Watchers and their descendants. The Book of Giants and Other Ancient Texts. Another ancient text that sheds light on this mysterious story is the Book of Giants, which dates back to the 2nd century BCE and was also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This text shares much in common with the Book of Enoch, but it has a unique feature. It names some of the Nephilim, the famous giants of old. One of the names that appears in the Book of Giants is Gilgamesh, the renowned figure from the ancient Mesopotamian epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh. You may wonder, what does a Sumerian hero like Gilgamesh have to do with the biblical Nephilim? Interestingly, Gilgamesh, a semi-divine king from Sumerian mythology, was believed to be the offspring of a god and a mortal woman, just like the Nephilim in the Bible. In both traditions, these hybrid beings were exceptionally strong, larger than life, and feared by ordinary humans. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, which dates back to the 3rd millennium BCE, Gilgamesh is described as being 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. His immense strength and height are legendary. In some versions of the story, he stands nearly 5 meters tall and is powerful enough to defeat any foe in combat. His divinity allows him to rule over his people with absolute authority, and no woman is beyond his reach. Gilgamesh's exploits, though heroic, are also marked by great cruelty and excess. It might seem strange that a text like the Book of Giants, written in Aramaic and found near Jerusalem, would combine the story of Genesis with tales from ancient Mesopotamia. At first glance, it appears that 2 unrelated traditions have been blended together. However, the ancient world, particularly the Levant region, including Israel, Judah, and surrounding nations, was not isolated. These cultures were in constant contact with one another, sharing myths, religious ideas, and concepts about the gods and giants. Moreover, parallels to the Nephilim story appear not just in Mesopotamian myths, but in Greek culture as well. For instance, the Greek tradition of demigods, heroes born of unions between gods and mortals, mirrors the Nephilim. In fact, one Greek text, the Catalogue of Women, traditionally attributed to Hesiod, opens with a similar theme. The text says, "Sing now, muses, of the race of women, daughters of gods and men." This text lists numerous heroes and heroines who were born from the union of mortals and gods, mirroring the biblical notion of giants as the offspring of divine beings and human women. However, this hybrid race of demigods was not well regarded by the supreme deity in Greek mythology, Zeus. According to the myth, Zeus decided to rid the earth of these beings, even if it meant causing widespread destruction. His solution was to instigate a war, the Trojan War, where these demigods would annihilate one another. This parallels another version of the biblical story, found in the Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text from around the same period as the Book of Enoch. According to this account, instead of being defeated by angels like in Enoch's version, God sent a sword among the giants, causing them to turn on each other and destroy themselves. There is an eerie similarity between the Greek myth of Zeus orchestrating the Trojan War to wipe out the demigods and the idea in the Book of Jubilees that God incited the giants to kill each other. These stories, though from different cultures, share a common theme: the divine decision to eliminate a race of hybrid beings that blurred the boundaries between gods and men. The connections between Greek myths and biblical traditions don't stop there. Another text, the Sibylline Oracles, makes an explicit link between the pre-flood giants of the Bible and the titans of Greek mythology. This is a much later text, written by Jewish authors living in a Greek-influenced culture, possibly in northern Egypt, with additions by Christian writers. In this text, the giants and titans are said to be part of the same race of beings. The oracles suggest that after the collapse of the Tower of Babel, 3 brothers divided control of the earth: Kronos, Titan, and Japetus. In Greek mythology, Kronos and Japetus were indeed titans, fathers of Zeus and Prometheus respectively, though there was no titan named simply Titan. The story continues by saying that Kronos eventually betrayed his brothers, and the titans began devouring Kronos' children, except for Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, who were hidden by their mother Rhea. Later, when the brothers were strong enough, they waged war against the titans, leading to the near annihilation of both sides. In the classical version of the Titanomachy, Zeus and his brothers emerge victorious, banishing the titans to the underworld, to a dark and torturous place called Tartarus. This is where another connection to the biblical tradition emerges. The New Testament makes reference to Tartarus, describing it as a prison where fallen angels who disobeyed in the days of Noah were cast. This idea of Tartarus, where beings who once challenged the gods are confined, parallels the biblical depiction of the fallen watchers imprisoned beneath the earth, the giants, and the origins of demons. As we continue to explore the ancient texts and traditions surrounding giants, we find that these figures are not just confined to biblical accounts or mythologies from other cultures. They also play a significant role in early Jewish and Christian interpretations regarding the origins of demons and evil spirits. This interpretation emerges from a deeper reflection on what happened to the Nephilim and their descendants after the flood. One of the many enigmas in the Genesis passage about the sons of God and the daughters of men is that the Nephilim are initially presented as ancient beings, implying that they belonged to a distant past. The text introduces these creatures with the phrase "in those days," suggesting a long-lost era. However, there is a curious addition in the text, "and also afterward." This small detail opens the possibility that the Nephilim did not entirely vanish after the flood. In fact, other biblical passages hint that some of these beings continued to exist in later times, such as during the days of Moses and David. But how could these giants, supposedly destroyed in the flood, have survived? The text of Genesis doesn't explain this, but ancient interpretations, particularly those found in extra-biblical sources like the Book of Enoch, offer several intriguing possibilities. One interpretation suggests that Og, the king of Bashan mentioned earlier, clung to the outside of Noah's Ark and thus survived the flood. Another proposes that one of Noah's sons, or even Noah himself, may have had some connection to the Nephilim, thereby ensuring their lineage survived. However, perhaps the most fascinating theory comes from the Book of Enoch and other early Jewish texts, such as the Book of Jubilees, as well as some early Christian writings. According to these sources, the bodies of the Nephilim may have perished in the flood, but their spirits endured. Stripped of their physical form, these disembodied spirits roamed the earth, causing havoc in the form of disease, violence, and evil inclinations among humans. In the Book of Jubilees, it is said that after the flood, Noah began to notice that his descendants were being afflicted by these malevolent spirits, which could infiltrate human bodies and cause sickness or stir up wicked thoughts. Disturbed by this, Noah prayed to God, asking him to bind these spirits and protect his family from their influence. God agreed to this request, but only partially. While he imprisoned most of the evil spirits, he allowed a small portion to remain free to roam the earth. According to this tradition, these remaining spirits were responsible for causing much of the evil and suffering in the world, acting as agents of destruction and temptation. In these texts, the leader of these spirits is a giant named Mastema, who pleads with God to leave at least a few of his subordinates free to test humanity. Mastema's plea is based on the belief that without these spirits, humanity would not face the necessary trials to prove their loyalty to God. God relents, allowing 1/10 of the fallen spirits to continue their work, while the rest are sent to a place of judgment, awaiting their final punishment. This narrative provides an early Jewish explanation for the existence of evil spirits and demons. It links their origin directly to the Nephilim, the offspring of the illicit union between the Watchers and human women. As a result, the spirits of these giants were thought to be responsible for possession, madness, and various forms of physical and spiritual affliction. In fact, this tradition is referenced in the New Testament, particularly in the letters attributed to Peter. One passage speaks of Christ, put to death in the body but made alive in the spirit, going to preach to the spirits in prison, referring to the spirits that had disobeyed during the time of Noah. Another passage mentions that God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. In both instances, these spirits are believed to be the fallen watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. The use of the word hell in this context is also worth noting. The original Greek term used in these verses is Tartarus, a direct reference to the place in Greek mythology where the Titans were imprisoned after their defeat by Zeus. The fusion of these ideas, biblical giants and Greek Titans, highlights how early Jewish and Christian writers saw parallels between their own traditions and the mythologies of neighboring cultures. In early Christian thought, these fallen spirits, once giants, now demons, came to be associated not only with evil, but also with pagan gods. Some early Christian writers, such as Justin Martyr, believed that the demons who roamed the earth were the very beings worshipped by the pagans as gods. According to this belief, these ancient demons had tricked humanity into offering sacrifices and prayers to them, pretending to be gods when they were actually fallen angels and the spirits of the Nephilim. Justin Martyr, an important Christian apologist of the 2nd century, expressed this belief clearly. The angels transgressed, captivated by the love of women, and begat children who are called demons. And besides, they enslaved the human race to themselves, partly by magical writings, partly by fears and punishments they inflicted, and partly by teaching them to offer sacrifices, incense, and libations to satisfy their lusts. This interpretation, which links the origins of pagan gods with the fallen angels and Nephilim, would be accepted by many early Christians until at least the 4th century. Theological debates and interpretations. As time passed, the interpretation of the giants, the Nephilim, and their relation to demons and pagan gods evolved within Jewish and Christian traditions. By the 4th century, Christian theologians such as Augustine of Hippo began to propose a different understanding of the Genesis story of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Augustine's interpretation focused less on the idea of fallen angels mating with human women and more on a moralistic reading of the text. He proposed that the sons of God referred to righteous human men, particularly the descendants of Seth, while the daughters of men were the descendants of Cain. In this reading, the sin was not the mixing of heavenly and earthly beings, but rather the intermarriage between the godly line of Seth and the ungodly line of Cain. This interpretation gained traction in both Christian and Jewish circles, with some Jewish scholars also rejecting the angelic interpretation of the text. Instead, they emphasized a more human-centered reading, where the sons of God were understood to be the elite or rulers who abused their power and took women as they pleased. This moral interpretation sought to downplay the supernatural elements of the story, aligning more closely with theological doctrines that were becoming increasingly formalized in both Judaism and Christianity. However, even as this interpretation became more popular, the older, more supernatural reading of the text never completely disappeared. In fact, in certain circles, particularly among mystics and apocalyptic writers, the idea of fallen angels, Nephilim, and giants continued to be a source of fascination. These traditions thrived in the margins of mainstream thought, influencing later interpretations of the role of giants in both biblical and extra-biblical stories. By this point, the question arises, who exactly were these giants? Were they merely men of great size? Or did they represent something more? The biblical texts, especially the brief mentions of figures like Og and Goliath, provide tantalizing glimpses of a race of beings who seem to tower over ordinary humans. In the story of Og, for example, the giant king is described as sleeping in a bed over 4 meters long and 2 meters wide. While this might be an exaggeration, it suggests that Og was of extraordinary size, far larger than a typical human. Similarly, Goliath's height, measured in cubits, places him at around 3 meters tall in some versions of the text. However, as mentioned earlier, older manuscripts, such as those found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggest that Goliath may have been shorter, possibly closer to 2 meters. Even at this height, Goliath would have been an imposing figure, especially in a time when the average height of a man was significantly less than it is today. Yet, despite these impressive dimensions, it is clear that these giants were more than just physically large. They carried a symbolic weight that far exceeded their stature. The Bible's depiction of giants, especially in the context of the Nephilim, is not just about their physical size but also about their connection to a deeper, more troubling reality. These beings were seen as the offspring of a forbidden union between divine beings and mortals, and their presence on Earth was viewed as a direct challenge to the natural order established by God. The giants were not merely large, they were reminders of a world that had once gone terribly wrong. A world that had been so corrupt and chaotic that it required divine intervention in the form of the Great Flood. The persistence of giants in later biblical stories, even after the flood, suggests that the problems they represented were not fully resolved by the flood's destruction. In the time of Moses, giants still roamed the earth, and later, in the time of David, these beings reappeared. Each encounter with a giant, whether it was Moses confronting Og or David facing Goliath, was a symbolic battle between good and evil, between the forces of chaos and the divine order that sought to restore balance. This enduring conflict between humanity and giants, or what they represented, is echoed in other cultural traditions as well. In Greek mythology, for example, the war between the Olympian gods and the Titans is a recurring theme. The Titans, much like the Nephilim, were a race of powerful beings who existed before the current order of gods. They were eventually overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians, who represented the new divine order. The Titans, defeated and imprisoned in Tartarus, serve as a constant reminder of a past world that had been chaotic and dangerous, much like the Nephilim in biblical tradition. Interestingly, both Jewish and Christian texts make direct connections between the Nephilim and the Titans, as mentioned earlier with references to Tartarus in the New Testament. These connections suggest that early Jewish and Christian writers were aware of the similarities between their own stories of giants and those found in other cultures, and they used these parallels to enrich their theological narratives. One of the most important contributions of this cross-cultural exchange is the idea that the giants, after being physically destroyed, continued to exist as disembodied spirits. As mentioned in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, the spirits of the Nephilim were believed to have survived the flood and continued to torment humanity in the form of demons. This belief became central to early Christian demonology, where demons were understood to be the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, still wreaking havoc on the earth and possessing the bodies of humans. This idea of giants transforming into demons also finds resonance in the Greek tradition of the Titans. After their defeat, the Titans were banished to Tartarus, a dark, prison-like underworld where they suffered eternal punishment. While they no longer roamed the earth, their influence persisted through their association with chaos, destruction, and disorder. The role of giants in apocalyptic visions. As we continue to explore the influence of giants in biblical and extra-biblical literature, we see that these figures played a significant role in apocalyptic traditions as well. In early Jewish and Christian apocalyptic texts, giants are often depicted as central players in the cosmic battle between good and evil. Their presence in these stories serves as a reminder of past divine judgment and the ongoing spiritual warfare that is believed to affect the fate of humanity. One of the most prominent apocalyptic texts that expands on the role of giants is the Book of Enoch. In this work, the Watchers, the angels who descended to earth and fathered the Nephilim, are seen as key antagonists in the grand narrative of human history. The actions of these fallen angels, particularly their decision to share forbidden knowledge with humanity, are portrayed as a direct challenge to the divine order. This transgression not only leads to the birth of the Nephilim, but also to the corruption of human society, which eventually results in the Great Flood as an act of divine judgment. The Book of Enoch describes in vivid detail how the Watchers, led by their chief Semjaza, taught humans secret arts, including metalworking, magic, and the creation of weapons. These teachings, which were reserved for the heavenly realm, were never meant to be shared with humanity, and their introduction into human society led to widespread violence and chaos. The giants, born from the union of the Watchers and human women, became a physical manifestation of this corruption, towering over ordinary humans and oppressing them through brute strength and domination. This theme of forbidden knowledge and the resulting corruption of humanity is a recurring motif in apocalyptic literature. In many ways, the giants and their influence represent the consequences of stepping beyond the boundaries that God has set for humanity. The destruction of the giants in the flood is seen as a necessary act to cleanse the earth, but the apocalyptic vision suggests that their legacy endures through their disembodied spirits, which continue to haunt the world as evil spirits and demons. In the Book of Enoch, the judgment of the Watchers and their offspring is a central theme. After the giants have wrought devastation on the earth, God orders the archangels to imprison the Watchers and destroy the giants. The Watchers are cast into a dark abyss beneath the earth, while the giants are slain. However, the spirits of the giants, being half divine, cannot be fully destroyed. Instead, they become wandering spirits, doomed to roam the earth and torment humanity. These spirits are described as hungry, restless beings always seeking to possess and corrupt human souls. This portrayal of the giant spirits as demonic forces heavily influenced early Christian ideas about demons. As Christianity developed, particularly in the writings of early church fathers, demons were increasingly understood to be the lingering spirits of the Nephilim, the offspring of the fallen angels. This belief provided an explanation for the persistence of evil and suffering in the world, even after the flood had supposedly wiped out the physical presence of the giants. In the Christian apocalyptic tradition, particularly in texts like the Apocalypse of Peter and the Revelation of John, the idea of demonic forces playing a role in the final judgment is prominent. These demons, the spirits of the Nephilim, are seen as active agents in the chaos and suffering that precedes the end of the world. They are depicted as tormentors of the wicked, and as part of Satan's army in the ultimate battle between good and evil. The connection between giants, demons, and the apocalypse is further explored in early Christian interpretations of hell. In many early Christian writings, hell is described as a place where not only the wicked, but also the fallen angels and the spirits of the giants are imprisoned awaiting their final judgment. This view is supported by references in the New Testament to the spirits in prison, which are interpreted as the souls of the watchers and their offspring. These spirits are depicted as being held in chains in a dark subterranean realm, much like the Titans of Greek mythology, who were also imprisoned in Tartarus after their defeat. Interestingly, the connection between giants and demons in apocalyptic literature was not just limited to Jewish and Christian texts. In other ancient cultures, giants often played a role in end-of-the-world scenarios. For example, in Norse mythology, the final battle of Ragnarok features a race of giants who rise up to fight against the gods, leading to the destruction of the world. Similarly, in Zoroastrianism, the end of the world involves a final confrontation between the forces of good and evil, with giants being part of the evil forces. In each of these traditions, giants are associated with chaos, destruction, and the breakdown of order. Whether they are depicted as physical beings or as disembodied spirits, their presence symbolizes a world that is out of balance, a world where the boundaries between the divine and the human have been blurred. The apocalyptic visions of both Jewish and Christian texts reflect this fear of a return to the chaos that existed before the flood, a chaos embodied by the giants and their demonic descendants. The theme of giants as agents of chaos also plays a role in the Christian understanding of spiritual warfare. In the writings of early Christian theologians, spiritual warfare is often framed as a battle between the forces of good, led by God and his angels, and the forces of evil, led by Satan and his demons. The demons, who are understood to be the spirits of the Nephilim, are seen as constantly seeking to lead humans astray, tempting them into sin and rebellion against God. This spiritual battle is not just a metaphorical one. In early Christian thought, it is a very real and ongoing conflict. Demons are portrayed as actively working to possess human bodies, cause sickness, and influence human behavior. The only defense against these forces is faith in God and adherence to his commandments. In this way, the story of the giants and their demonic descendants serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of stepping outside the boundaries set by God, and the consequences of falling under the influence of evil. Giants in early Christianity and the Middle Ages. As we delve further into the influence of giants and the Nephilim in early Christian thought, and into the medieval period, it becomes clear that these figures continued to hold a significant place in theological discussions and cultural imaginations. Early Christians, while shaping their understanding of giants through biblical texts and apocryphal writings, also inherited centuries of traditions that connected giants to spiritual warfare, demons, and the overarching narrative of human salvation and divine judgment. In the early centuries of Christianity, theologians sought to explain the existence of evil spirits and demonic influences, tracing their origins to the Nephilim and the fallen angels. This belief, deeply rooted in apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, played a significant role in shaping early Christian demonology. The idea that the spirits of the Nephilim became demons, actively tormenting humanity and causing spiritual harm, resonated with early Christians who saw the world as embroiled in a constant battle between good and evil. As mentioned earlier, church fathers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian all discussed the Nephilim in relation to their understanding of demons. These early theologians proposed that many of the pagan gods worshipped by the Greeks and Romans were actually demons, former Nephilim, who who had deceived humanity into offering them worship and sacrifices. The idea that these fallen angels and their offspring could manifest as false gods helped to reinforce the Christian rejection of polytheism and idol worship, solidifying the divide between the Christian faith and the pagan practices that still persisted in the Roman Empire. Tertullian in particular was a vocal advocate of this view. In his writings, he described how the fallen angels had introduced idolatry to humanity, masquerading as gods to mislead people. He believed that the origins of all forms of pagan worship could be traced back to the Watchers and their corrupt influence on humanity. This idea that the Nephilim were not only responsible for the corruption of the pre-flood world, but also for the rise of idolatry after the flood was a powerful tool in the early church's efforts to distinguish itself from the surrounding pagan cultures. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, the concept of giants continued to evolve. In the medieval period, the idea of giants took on a more symbolic role, representing not only physical opposition to God's people, but also spiritual opposition. Giants came to symbolize the vast, insurmountable challenges that Christians faced, both from external forces, such as paganism and heresy, and from internal spiritual struggles, such as sin and temptation. Medieval theologians and writers influenced by earlier Christian traditions continued to depict giants as beings that represented chaos and rebellion against divine order. Giants were often portrayed as physical manifestations of spiritual evil, embodying the idea of humanity's defiance of God. This is evident in many medieval legends and literary works, where giants appear as antagonists to Christian heroes, often representing the forces of paganism or moral corruption. One of the most famous medieval texts that feature giants is the Chanson de Roland, a French epic poem from the 11th century. In this poem, giants serve as enemies of the Christian knights, representing both physical and spiritual obstacles that must be overcome. This depiction of giants as forces of evil that stand in the way of God's chosen people mirrors the biblical narratives of the Nephilim, who opposed Moses, David, and other figures chosen by God. In addition to their role in literature, giants also played an important part in medieval Christian iconography. Giants were frequently depicted in medieval art and architecture, often as defeated foes under the feet of saints or angels. These images served as visual reminders of the ultimate victory of good over evil, reinforcing the idea that, just as David had defeated Goliath, so too would God's people triumph over the forces of chaos and sin. The story of David and Goliath in particular became a powerful symbol in medieval Christianity. David's defeat of the giant Goliath was seen not just as a historical event, but as a metaphor for the victory of faith over seemingly insurmountable odds. This story was often invoked in sermons, art, and literature as an example of how Christians could rely on God's power to overcome the giants, both literal and figurative, in their lives. In this way, giants became more than just historical or mythological figures. They became symbols of the spiritual battles that every Christian must face. The connection between giants and the concept of spiritual warfare persisted throughout the medieval period and into the Renaissance. During this time, theological and philosophical works continued to explore the relationship between giants, demons, and the ongoing battle between good and evil. Giants were often depicted as agents of Satan, playing a key role in the allegorical representations of sin, temptation, and moral decay. In Renaissance art, for instance, giants and other monstrous figures were frequently used to represent the forces of evil. Artists drew upon both biblical and classical sources, blending the Nephilim with the Titans and other mythological giants to create complex, symbolic works that illustrated the struggle between heaven and hell. These depictions often emphasized the ultimate defeat of the giants, reinforcing the Christian message of redemption and divine justice. The story of the Nephilim, however, continued to inspire not only theological discussions, but also speculative thought. In the later Middle Ages and the early modern period, the fascination with giants and their possible survival beyond the biblical flood led to numerous debates. Some writers and scholars speculated about the existence of giants in unexplored lands, often tying these speculations to biblical accounts. Giants became part of the broader imagination of what might exist in the farthest corners of the earth, with travelers and explorers frequently reporting encounters with enormous beings in distant lands. One notable example of this is the 16th century Spanish explorer Hernán Cortés, who claimed to have heard tales of giants from the indigenous peoples of Mexico. These stories, which were reported back to Europe, only fueled the already widespread fascination with giants. In fact, in some regions of Europe, local folklore still preserved tales of giants who once roamed the earth or who lived in remote, hidden locations. The belief in giants, though increasingly symbolic in Christian thought, remained a potent part of popular imagination well into the early modern period. The blending of biblical, mythological, and folkloric traditions ensured that giants would continue to be a subject of interest, not only for theologians but for poets, artists, and explorers. The giants in modern theology and popular culture. As the Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment and modernity, the literal belief in giants began to wane in theological and academic circles, but their symbolic power remained significant. With the rise of science and a more rationalistic approach to understanding the world, giants were increasingly seen as mythical or allegorical figures rather than real, physical beings. However, giants never fully disappeared from religious discourse or popular imagination. Instead, their role evolved, becoming more metaphorical while maintaining their roots in biblical and cultural traditions. In modern Christian theology, giants are often interpreted symbolically, representing various forms of evil, oppression, or overwhelming challenges that believers must confront. The story of David and Goliath, for instance, continues to be a popular subject in sermons, symbolizing the victory of faith, courage, and divine assistance over seemingly impossible odds. While few modern theologians argue for the literal existence of giants, the moral and spiritual lessons derived from these stories remain deeply influential. In particular, the narrative of David defeating Goliath has become a universal metaphor for the underdog triumphing over a more powerful adversary. This theme resonates not only within Christian teachings but also in secular contexts, where David and Goliath is commonly used to describe scenarios in sports, politics, and personal struggles, where a weaker individual or group unexpectedly overcomes a stronger opponent. The universality of this story highlights how the symbolism of giants has transcended its biblical origins and permeated broader cultural consciousness. In popular culture, giants continue to captivate audiences. From literature to film and video games, giants are frequently portrayed as powerful antagonists, often embodying primal or elemental forces. In many cases, these giants are inspired by the biblical Nephilim or the mythological Titans, drawing on the ancient idea of beings who challenge the established order of the world. For example, in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, the towering figures of the Ents, though not evil, evoke the immense power and mystery that giants have represented throughout history. Similarly, in modern fantasy genres, giants often appear as powerful foes or ancient beings that represent nature's untamed and dangerous aspects. In the realm of film, giants have also played a significant role in shaping modern storytelling. Movies like Jack the Giant Slayer or the BFG present giants as formidable and sometimes sympathetic characters, showing the complexity of their portrayal. These giants are no longer just embodiments of evil. Instead, they are often shown with more depth, sometimes as misunderstood creatures or relics of a past age. Moreover, giants in popular culture have continued to be linked with themes of moral and spiritual conflict, much like their biblical counterparts. For instance, in Attack on Titan, a Japanese manga and anime series, giants, or titans, are depicted as monstrous beings that have nearly wiped out humanity. The series explores themes of survival, fear, and the consequences of human hubris, echoing ancient ideas about giants as forces of chaos and destruction that threaten divine order. In addition to their role in fictional works, giants continue to appear in various conspiracy theories and fringe interpretations of history and archaeology. Some groups, especially those inclined toward pseudoscience, claim that giants did indeed exist, and that evidence of their remains has been suppressed by mainstream academia. These theories often tie back to biblical accounts of the Nephilim, and the idea that ancient giants once walked the earth. Such fringe theories tend to focus on reports of large human skeletons found in archaeological digs, often claiming that these remains prove the existence of giants in the past. However, most of these claims have been debunked or discredited by professional archaeologists, with many of the giant skeletons either being hoaxes or misidentified remains of large prehistoric animals. Despite the lack of credible evidence, the fascination with giants persists in certain circles, further highlighting the enduring power of these ancient stories. The continued interest in giants within conspiracy theories often stems from a desire to connect modern discoveries with ancient biblical accounts. For some, proving the existence of giants would validate their belief in the literal truth of the Bible, particularly the stories in Genesis about the Nephilim. These theories, while not supported by mainstream science, reflect the deep psychological and cultural need to connect the distant past with present-day mysteries and questions about human origins. Giants also find their place in modern biblical scholarship, though in a more nuanced and historical context. Scholars today often examine the ancient Near Eastern environment in which the Bible was written, looking at how the biblical accounts of giants might have been influenced by surrounding cultures, such as the Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Canaanite traditions. This comparative approach reveals that giants, or figures similar to the Nephilim, were a common feature in the mythologies and religious texts of various ancient civilizations. In fact, the Nephilim may have been part of a broader cultural exchange between Israel and its neighbors, with giants serving as symbols of the pre-flood chaos and the breakdown of the divine human order. By placing the biblical giants within this larger cultural and historical framework, modern scholars can better understand how these stories functioned in the ancient world, both as theological reflections on sin and rebellion, and as reflections of a shared mythological landscape. Interestingly, some modern interpretations of the Nephilim and giants also focus on their theological implications regarding the nature of sin, divine judgment, and the human condition. For example, theologians and biblical scholars may explore how the story of the Nephilim fits within the broader biblical narrative of God's relationship with humanity, particularly the theme of human beings crossing boundaries that God has set. The giants, as products of a forbidden union between divine beings and humans, represent the consequences of these transgressions, both in a physical and spiritual sense. In this way, giants in modern theological discourse are often seen as symbols of humanity's ongoing struggle with sin and rebellion against divine authority. Just as the Nephilim were wiped out by the flood, the modern Christian message emphasizes the need for repentance and alignment with God's will to avoid similar judgment. The giants, then, continue to serve as reminders of the dangers of pride, disobedience, and the chaos that ensues when humanity attempts to usurp the natural order established by God. While the literal belief in giants may no longer be widespread, the metaphors they represent, spiritual challenges, the consequences of sin, and the enduring battle between good and evil, remain deeply embedded in both religious and secular narratives. From ancient texts to modern cinema, giants have adapted to fit the needs and concerns of each era, serving as powerful symbols of the human condition. Giants as archetypes of human struggle. As we examine the role of giants throughout history and across cultures, it becomes clear that these beings have come to embody more than just physical might or mythological intrigue. They have evolved into powerful archetypes representing the universal human struggle against overwhelming forces. Whether viewed through a religious, psychological, or literary lens, giants consistently appear as symbols of the internal and external battles faced by humanity. In biblical narratives, giants like Goliath, Og, and the Nephilim represent literal and spiritual obstacles. Goliath, for instance, is not just a towering warrior but a symbol of the impossible odds that the faithful must overcome. His defeat at the hands of young David, who relies not on physical strength but on faith and divine assistance, underscores a recurring biblical theme. With God, even the weakest can overcome the most daunting challenges. This narrative serves as a spiritual lesson about trust in divine providence and the triumph of righteousness over brute force. However, the story of David and Goliath is more than just a religious parable. It has become a metaphor for countless human experiences where individuals or groups face seemingly insurmountable odds. In the context of modern psychology, the giants that people confront are often internal: fear, doubt, trauma, or personal limitations. Much like David, individuals are encouraged to face these inner giants with courage, resilience, and the belief that overcoming them is possible through personal growth, faith, or perseverance. This psychological interpretation is also found in literary analysis, where giants often symbolize the deep, primal fears within the human psyche. In works like John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, giants are allegories for spiritual dangers and temptations that the protagonist must overcome on his journey toward salvation. The giants in this allegory are more than just physical threats. They represent the overwhelming burdens of despair, doubt, and sin that can obstruct the path to spiritual fulfillment. This archetypal use of giants transcends Christian literature. In the works of Carl Jung and other depth psychologists, giants represent the shadow side of the human personality, the repressed aspects of ourselves that, when unacknowledged, grow into monstrous, uncontrollable forces. The giant, in this sense, is a metaphor for the parts of the self that we fear to confront, but must eventually face in order to achieve psychological integration and personal growth. Jung's concept of the shadow aligns with the biblical depiction of the Nephilim and other giants as beings who exist outside of the divine order. They are born of forbidden unions, representing the crossing of natural boundaries and the consequences of defying divine law. In psychological terms, they represent the chaos that ensues when humans ignore the moral and ethical structures that guide healthy development. The giants, like the shadow self, are not evil in themselves, but they become destructive when ignored, suppressed, or allowed to dominate. The archetype of the giant as an embodiment of struggle is also evident in modern popular culture. In many contemporary stories, giants are depicted as obstacles that the hero must overcome to complete their journey. In J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, for example, giants represent both a physical threat and a symbol of the larger battle between good and evil. While they are powerful beings with the potential for great destruction, their role in the narrative is nuanced, reflecting the complexity of moral struggles in the human world. Similarly, in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, giants are part of the ancient mystical forces that humanity must contend with as it navigates political and personal conflicts. The giants in this world are remnants of a forgotten age, their existence reminding characters of the primordial struggles that still influence the present. They are not just physical beings, they are symbols of the larger, uncontrollable forces of nature, history, and fate. This portrayal of giants as symbols of uncontrollable forces is not limited to fantasy literature. In modern cinema, giants often appear in the context of post-apocalyptic or dystopian worlds, where they represent the collapse of social and natural orders. Films like Pacific Rim and Godzilla feature enormous creatures that threaten human civilization, symbolizing humanity's struggle against nature's wrath, or the consequences of its own technological hubris. The figure of the giant, then, is not simply a relic of ancient mythology or religious texts. It remains a relevant and potent symbol in modern storytelling, capturing the tension between human ambition and the natural or divine forces that limit and challenge it. Giants remind us of our own limitations and the need for humility in the face of the vast and often unpredictable world around us. In addition to representing personal and societal struggles, giants also serve as metaphors for the broader human condition. They embody the existential challenges that all humans face: mortality, the search for meaning, and the constant battle between order and chaos. Just as the biblical giants existed at the margins of the human world, threatening the established order, the giants of the modern imagination represent the unknown, the uncontrollable, and the terrifying aspects of existence. Yet, giants are not always depicted as purely malevolent beings. In many stories, they also represent ancient wisdom, natural power, and the potential for reconciliation between humanity and the forces it cannot control. For example, in the film The BFG, adapted from Roald Dahl's novel, the titular giant is a gentle, kind-hearted figure who befriends a young girl and helps her navigate the dangers of both the human and giant worlds. This portrayal of giants as protectors or guides reflects another aspect of the archetype: the idea that the forces we fear may also hold the key to understanding ourselves and the world. This dual nature of giants, as both threats and potential allies, mirrors the complexity of the challenges we face in life. Just as David faced Goliath not only with fear, but also with faith in a higher power, we are reminded that the giants we encounter, whether internal or external, can be overcome through courage, wisdom, and humility. In conclusion, the enduring presence of giants in religious, literary, and popular culture reflects their deep symbolic resonance. Giants represent the vast, often terrifying forces that challenge human beings, whether those challenges come from within or from the world around us. They serve as reminders of our vulnerability, but also of our capacity to rise above those challenges. Whether they appear as Nephilim in ancient texts or as towering foes in modern movies, giants continue to capture the imagination, standing as symbols of the eternal human struggle against overwhelming odds. Curious to dive deeper into the mystery of the Nephilim? Watch the video, The Shocking Truth About the Nephilim, What the Bible Doesn't Want You to Know, on our partner channel now. Discover hidden secrets and shocking details about the giants of the Bible that have never been revealed before. Click the video on the end screen or check the first pinned comment and join this eye-opening journey.